Welcome to a replay of one of our many excellent talks from Secure Southwest 15, and thanks again to our sponsors Securious, C3IA, CrowdStrike and the British Computer Society, and most importantly our prime sponsor the UK Government Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport.
Zeki joins us from CrowdStrike as the CTO and is going to illuminate us as to how automation is changing the face of skills needs in cybersecurity. Zeki, very good work.
Just to annoy you, I'm actually going to change the title completely and talk about something completely irrelevant, just to keep you on your feet here. I'm also going to really hope the clicker works because I've got about 150 slides. I'm not. It is working. Yay. Okay, great. This makes my life a lot easier because I've got lots of transitions. I like fancy graphics, so it works for me. So I'm Zeki Turedi. I'm the regional CTO for CrowdStrike. Some people may know us. Some people may have never heard of us. We're actually a $50 billion cybersecurity organization based out of the US. I joined CrowdStrike 6 years ago. We were 3 people. We now actually have over 1,000 people across Europe and over 400 people here in the UK. So guess what? Cybersecurity is booming. Great time to get into this. Just for those who are coming out of university, we have an intern program, so feel free to look into that. And as I said, we've currently got 800 roles looking for new people in many different parts of cybersecurity. So if you're looking for a new job, please hit us up. But I'm not going to talk about education. Well, a little bit. I want to show you what we do every single day and why cybersecurity is important. Our customers are some of the world's largest organizations. Some of them come to us when they are having a really bad day or week or month, but we also work with very small companies. It could be a family-run organization. It could be a company that's got 1 million endpoints. We don't care. We are there to help all of them. Unfortunately, cyber threats don't really care anymore. This whole, if you're a large organization, then you're the only type of company that should really care about cyber. That's actually long gone. The cyber threat actor is very varied and really doesn't care anymore. They're very diverse, shall we say. So when we talk about threat actors, we're typically talking about 3 core threat actors. We've got the nation states. So these are typically, an organization, a group, an individual in some cases, working on behalf of a government or has sometimes a nexus to a government. We then have criminal organizations. This is actually the area that's massively expanded, especially in the last 2 years. We saw the pandemic create a great opportunity for these adversaries to learn their tradecraft, make a bit of money and reinvest in themselves. But then we also see hacktivist organizations as well. And this is something that we've seen a big boom, especially in the last, for example, last 48 hours, we saw big companies being targeted by potentially hacktivist organizations based out of Latin America. We're seeing huge amounts of hacktivists targeting Russia and Ukraine. And we also see a bigger amount in Iran, for example, targeting their own government. I'll talk a bit more about that in a few more slides. And this is typically what our world looks like. These are every single different threat actors that we track across the globe. And of course, this is not every threat actor. These are the type of threat actors targeting our customers. So ranging from Cosmic Wolf in Turkey all the way to, we call bears, for example, Russia. We find it fun to call it the national animal. So again, we then have, Pakistan is the leopard, and the mythical flying horse, which is a chilima, is the national animal of North Korea. I am still waiting for a pub quiz for that to come up. But yeah, anyway. But this is what the threat landscape looks like right now. These are all different threat actors with different motivations, interests, capabilities, sophistication. And unfortunately, they're targeting the companies, the countries that we're operating and supporting right now. But we need scope. And it's great having that big list of what to look at, but the reality is not all of them are going to be a concern for us. And some of them are a bigger concern. And the way that we can kind of create scope is by really understanding the capabilities and the intentions of those different adversary actors. And this allows us to start really understanding the ones that we should be focusing on the most. So if we kind of look at the top, shall we say, the top few versus capabilities for intentions, we can start seeing the likes of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Russia, China. They're typically the biggest ones that we're looking at and tracking at the moment with the biggest motivations and intentions, but more importantly, capabilities in targeting companies and countries at this moment in time. Okay. I think it's important about education. So a little bit less about cool, fancy names and more of actually what we're currently seeing over the last few years. This for me is actually a really important metric. We call it the breakout time. It's actually a metric that I think a lot of organizations really undermine or don't really think about too much. The reason why I think it's such an important metric is in security, we're always chasing something, but we don't know what we're exactly chasing. We're chasing being better, but better at what? We want to identify more threats. We want to stop being breached. That's great ideas strategically, but how do we actually implement that? So one of the metrics that we've been tracking is what we call the breakout time. And this is actually how long it takes a threat actor, any threat actor, to get into an organization and then start moving laterally within a company. The reason why this metric is so important is, guess what? It's impossible to stop a device from being popped by an attacker. They always get a way through. There's a million methods of getting into a single device. So it becomes important about how quickly we respond to that attacker on that single device. Because guess what? If they go into a second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 100 machines, life becomes hard as an instant responder. You could be the best team in the world with the best technologies and tools, but you're not going to have you're not going home early, you're canceling your holidays, and you're probably working through many weekends. So the aim is make our life easy. By making our life easy, is making sure the second an attacker, any attacker could be, hits one machine, and we can respond quick enough and isolate or contain or remediate that one machine, our life is easy. And we've been tracking this metric for quite some time. And recently, what we saw e-crime organizations on average hitting 1 hour and 38 minutes. Actually, some of the better ones were doing this in about 32 minutes. So that's how long it takes them to get into a single device, get credentials, and start moving across the organization. The reason why it's such an important metric is this now allows us a baseline, an idea of how quickly we need to identify threats in our organization. How quick do we need to actually respond? But actually from a business perspective, what our internal SLAs and processes need to be. Well, the great piece of information about this is majority of organizations probably have an internal process that doesn't allow them to respond quick enough. I'll give you an example. Organizations, we like to have disparate tools, disparate teams, and it could be a piece of information you need from another part of your organization. Maybe it's from the network team. I want to know this IP address, has it hit our network firewalls? And the response you get from the network team is, we'll tell you in 8 hours, or we'll tell you in 8 days. That's our internal SLA. Straight away, that metric is something we can't beat. So it's a really nice metric we can use internally to, again, understand where we need to have better processes and streamline our abilities internally. Unfortunately, about 2 years ago, this metric was at 9 hours. So again, it gives you an idea how quick the sophisticated those criminal actors have become over the last 2 years. This is quite a big graph, but again, it gives you an idea of some of the different activities we've been seeing over the last 12 months. So we've got hacktivists, targeted intrusions, unattributed, because actually attribution is quite hard. And sometimes you don't know the attribution straight away. It could take time. And also e-crime. So the biggest kind of differences you saw here is we look at targeted, so this is kind of your nation states, your targeted intrusions, actually massively grew over the last 12 months. If we looked between 2019 and 2020, we actually saw nation state activity massively drop during that initial window, most predominantly around the pandemic. Reason was, they weren't targeting companies anymore. They were targeting certain governments to try and get operational intelligence on what on earth was going on with the pandemic. We saw countries like Venezuela and Vietnam actually build their response plans based on intelligence they gathered through other governments and capturing information from regarding testing and so forth. But what's quite interestingly, we started to see a steady increase in the amount of e-crime, although it has kind of dropped a little bit over the last few months. The biggest piece of information out this is what we call kind of the increase in what we call data leaks or ransomware via dedicated leak sites. This is the biggest shift we've seen in the ransomware field over the last 2 years. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we started seeing a huge increase of ransomware attacks. These were extremely successful. We then saw organizations get better at backups, having offshore or cloud backups. So if they did get ransomware, who cares? They can restore their systems through these backups they've been maintaining. But then the ransomware operators realized this. So they started, as part of their operation, capturing sensitive information, capturing customer ID, IP information, and actually siphoning this data off before encrypting and basically disrupting the networks. So what they've done is yes, fair enough, you can recover through your backups, but what you can't recover is data being stolen. And then they started building these dedicated leak sites. They were very clever with these leak sites because they even started getting journalists involved. We started to see some ransomware operators were paying journalists in certain countries to support them and actually make the noise as much loud as possible that they've actually targeted these organizations. They started marketing the data. So it wasn't, for example, we attacked an organization and we're going to leak straight away. It was, we're going to share this information slowly, trickle it out. So there's always going to be, a momentum on this data being public. And they marketed it very, very successfully. So it became a big business problem for this to happen. And it's now been a tactic that we only saw being used a few times, about 18 months ago by a small array of ransomware operators. And now this is the de facto standard capability for ransomware operators. I'll probably share this slide. It's probably not the greatest slide when looking at it on a presentation, but this gives you an idea of the different data leak sites over the last year and the types of targeting of organizations. We still see the majority of ransomware-like operations targeting companies and organizations with quite quick processes, so engineering, supply chain, the type of businesses that if they get impacted and their networks are disrupted, it's going to cost a lot of money to their business. But we're seeing this massively spread. The unfortunate state is of ransomware, this tooling is no longer just for the sophisticated actors. We're seeing it being sold off as, like ransomware as a service. So we talk about, software as a service, SaaS platforms, where anyone can take a technology in the cloud and use it. The ransomware operators are doing the exact same thing. So selling their ransomware as a service to very, very immature, amateur individuals who can actually start running very sophisticated ransomware attacks to any size of organizations. And again, so looking at the past from the 2020, we saw on average around $6.1 million per ransom. So huge amounts of money for organizations being targeted. This is quite a heavy technical slide, but this is kind of what we're seeing from a regional focus across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. To give you an idea of the kind of breakdown of the types of behaviors we're seeing, really mainly targeting Europe. So for example, we're seeing a huge increase in e-crime. So 36% of the activity that we see is actually e-crime, 12% being targeted. As I said, attribution is hard, unknown is still quite high. Unfortunately, when you stop attacks, you don't always know who it actually may be. But interestingly is the operating systems. So again, as expected, majority of organizations use Windows. The majority of vulnerabilities out there are Windows-based, but we're starting to see a very big increase in Linux systems, mainly because people kind of know that some companies are pretty on the ball with Windows. They know to look for security issues on Windows. Not a lot of people are masters at Linux, and they use this to actually hide themselves. And even in some cases, we see organizations being breached in their Windows estate, the attacker creating, basically presence in their Linux estate, hiding out until the incident response engagement's been completed, then coming out of the woodworks of the Linux estate back into Windows. Interestingly, for EMEA, 0% on Mac. Now, that does not mean you are protected if you've got a Mac system. We are seeing tools being rapidly made for Mac operating systems. But the reality is, majority of organizations don't use Mac. And the kind of core rule for majority of threat actors is don't make their own life hard. If they can do it with Windows, they'll do it with Windows. But we have seen that transferable of tools to macOS. So if you've just got a full macOS estate or just using a Mac, you could be still vulnerable, but the risk is very, very low. Interestingly, I think someone talked about, at the beginning and talked about the education side of things, about PowerShell and those types of tools. Majority of the types of technologies being used by the adversary is things like PowerShell, living off the land. So tool sets that are already available on the actual devices. Cobalt Strike is a big tool that we see out there. For those who are not familiar with Cobalt Strike, it's actually a tool, commercially available tool used by pen testers every single day. But it's also got versions of it freely available on the internet that's used, repackaged, and retooled by adversaries as well. We've got Mimikatz. Like literally, Mimikatz has been around for nearly 15 years and it still works, which is shame on operating system builders. But again, it's a tool we see widely being used. But again, kind of taking into some of those real life tool sets and what we're seeing, I think it's quite interesting to give you a bit of a case study for those who probably don't see certain types of attacks on a frequent basis. This is actually a North Korean threat actor called Silent Chalima. And this is actually the activity we identified when they targeted a pharmaceuticals organization based out of the US. And this happened about 8 months ago now. So kind of as we're still dealing with COVID, getting a better idea of what's going on. But again, still a lot of organizations kind of mastering their inoculation processes. And again, certain governments and certain entities still quite interested in that data. I'm going to build it out for everyone to kind of see. But basically what happened was this attack was initiated on a number of Windows servers devices. It was basically what we saw was a number of very, very quick succession of activities happening on a device. We saw them basically targeting a local account on this system. And this sporadic activity was basically not something we would normally see. After later investigation, we started to see, for those who are familiar with SMB exec, SMB exec is basically a tool set that can allow a certain device to remotely send commands to another device. The Windows operating system doesn't actually leave a lot of artifacts for this kind of command. So again, it's kind of a command that's used quite frequently by adversaries because it leaves less trace, but it basically allows remote connection and remote command generation. We started seeing a number of other executions. So this adversary has a number of custom tool sets they use. One of them called Gift Stealer. The other one I can never really pronounce, Valor4 or Valor4. I always forget. Gift Stealer basically just goes around, sucks up all the files it's looking for and compresses them, encrypts them, and basically puts the extension called .gif. So trying to hide it from the users if they do see it. Valor4 is basically a command and control infrastructure. So basically it allows to kind of send that data to hard-coded infrastructure owned by the adversary. The interesting thing is that every time this adversary uses these tools, although they are quite similar, they're repackaged, re-encoded, re-obfuscated to basically hide themselves as much as possible when these tools get dropped. Kind of moving forward, we saw that they created a Windows service. Windows services are frequently used. This was to gain persistence and call out to another hard-coded C2 dedicated for the attack. But again, this is kind of a majority of attacks run through these kind of processes, one way or another. Very high level, this is the type of activity we're seeing on a regular basis. On the other side of like nation states, in 2020 and 2021, we saw a huge increase of Chinese threat actors targeting organizations. The reason why I raised this is it actually targeted, again, not big organizations or government institutions. We actually saw widespread attempts by Chinese adversaries to gain access to organizations of all sizes. This was mainly because of a vulnerability in the Microsoft Exchange on-premise server. They saw an opportunity when they identified the vulnerability and basically started doing widespread exploitation of devices across many different countries throughout Western countries in an attempt to gain access to these networks. Now, the idea, we believe, was to gain access, then work out where they've got access to, and then start trying to do intelligence collection from there. But again, a lot of companies and organizations who maybe would never thought Chinese nation states would be on their risk posture or threat landscape suddenly found themselves having web shells being dropped on their exchange servers from Chinese threat actors. Now, this became public, and very, very quickly, literally in less than 24 hours, when security researchers identified this zero-day vulnerability being used en masse by Chinese adversaries, the e-crime organizations started using it. So again, it becomes very important for us to realize that when things become leaked or become public, very, very quickly, the e-crime organizations want those tools as well, and will start utilizing them against organizations. We've also seen a huge increase in threats to cloud environments. Not only cloud environments being targeted and attacked. The interesting thing about cloud is, for most people, they believe that security is kind of built out the box for cloud environments. But the reality is, cloud is great for security, but it's not on by default. So we still need to make sure that when we are moving or utilizing cloud environments, security is developed, designed in those environments as well. Unfortunately, we've also got some misunderstanding what actual cloud is. For some technologies, cloud is actually what was built in a physical data center and simply moved into a virtual machine that sits in the cloud, and they call it cloud. So the same vulnerabilities and issues we had when it was in a physical box in a data center are the exact same issues we'll have when it gets moved into the cloud. And we need to be aware of that, especially, again, because just how they could be targeted in a physical data center, they can be targeted in a cloud environment as well. But interestingly, as we do digital transformation, so does the threat actor. And we're seeing huge amounts of threat actors utilize things like AWS, Azure. So again, the infrastructures that we're investing in and moving our companies to, so are the threat actors. And this actually provides a little bit of issue, because majority of organizations probably ignore traffic to AWS. But you probably shouldn't, because guess what? Some of that traffic may actually be malicious. So again, we need to make sure we're aware of these issues, because they're easily missed and misunderstood. And I think, if I'm honest, it's about education. So this may be a bit scaremongering. It's not meant to be. It's purely what I feel is, everyone in this room needs to understand, be it if you're still at university or running organization security themselves. The Russia-Ukraine situation does bring huge amounts of potential, keyword there, potential cyber risk to all of us. To give you an idea, right now, there's quite a lot of confusion in the cyber domain about this. We have, for example, well-known underground forums where we see a lot of e-crime, e-criminal organizations from Russia being blocked. So no longer allowed to kind of collaborate with their peers in certain places. We saw the ransomware operator group called Conti. They are very popular, very big, very successful. They actually came out a few days after the sanctions started being hit on Russia through European countries, and basically publicly said they will target companies and organizations and governments that are putting sanctions or removing themselves from Russia. This actually then created a bit of turmoil internally. Some of the group actors and members were basically saying, no, we're with Ukraine. Some of them were with Russia. And then the group kind of had its own issues with actually a load of data being leaked by a Ukrainian security researcher on one of the world's largest ransomware operators. But we still see a lot of e-crime organizations pro-Russia targeting companies, again, with the situation going out there. We also see a lot of e-crime using this commotion and confusion as a way of being able to kind of, focus on the distraction while they target businesses. We also saw widespread wiper malware targeting Ukraine. The reason why it's important, someone talked about, NotPetya. That was basically a targeting of ransomware, a wiper malware to Ukraine. We've been seeing this being targeting Ukraine for the last, several years. Just so happened to be, it actually leaked out of Ukraine and impacted many other organizations. We could see something similar. Now, they've learned from their mistakes, but the issues we have here is Russia is very sophisticated, but very sloppy at the same time. So we have to be kind of prepared and expectant of certain types of, spillage of damage that could impact organizations that have nothing to do with Ukraine. And lastly, we saw, for example, hacktivist organizations, anonymous, leaking huge amounts of data. We saw a very large food production and manufacturing company get huge amounts of their sensitive data leaked because they're refusing to come out of Russia. We saw things like media outlets like RT and Sputnik being taken down by Anonymous. So again, the world of cyber is very, very noisy right now. And lastly, this is typically what we're looking at. These are the adversary groups that we see operating actively, targeting Ukraine. But unfortunately, the last several days, we've also seen Western organizations being massively targeted by potential Russian nexus adversaries. They're doing huge amounts of scanning of infrastructure, public websites, VPNs, anything like RDPs, and looking for known vulnerabilities to gain access. Again, the reasons could be anything. It could be intelligence gathering. It could be something a lot worse. So again, there's a lot going on, a lot of activity, and this is the reason why we're here today to protect our organizations from these types of issues. The reality is we stop these types of attacks every single day. So it sounds quite scary, but the reality is things like Fancy Bear, Voodoo Bear, Primitive Bear, Russian GRU agents, FSB, get stopped by organizations every single day. And this is the reason why we invest ourselves in cybersecurity. So I think it's also fair to kind of give some recommendations. One thing, giving some information, do a bit of scaremongering, but you also need something to kind of take home with yourselves. And I think this could be used by anyone here today. So first of all, the first thing is secure your enterprise. There's a lot of organizations that invest in technology, but actually don't always turn on all the features. Analyze what you've got, turn on all those features because it's the right time to have it enabled. We talked about that breakout time, being able to stop the adversary when it hits one machine rather than multiple machines. Use that information, use that metric. And it's a great study when you're looking at incident response, for example, and how those processes can be refined and made more effective dealing with today's issues. The fourth one is drill. So this is about testing yourself and preparing yourself. I think immersive labs has come up quite a few times. It's a perfect technology to test yourself. And guess what? If you've done one training course once, you can go back. Because the second time you might be better, you might be quicker, you may be faster. Everything we do in cybersecurity has to be, based on experience. It has to be second knowledge. We need to be able to quickly respond and react. And you only do that by testing yourself on a continuous basis every single day. The reason is you do not want to be testing yourself in a real life incident. It's a bad time to start learning. So it's best to have done those tests and educate yourselves earlier. So when you do deal with a real life attack, you've got the experience. And lastly, know your adversary. Everything I've talked to you about today is what our landscape looks like. It's targeting organizations across the globe. We can't focus on everything and everyone because we need scope, that's a reality, but know your adversary. There's plenty of reports from our website through other security organizations. So learn about the threat actors, learn what vulnerabilities they're using, and use that with your day-to-day work or your research. So thank you.